It was dangerous times, and the British missionaries went home, leaving the field to the indigenous preachers. This allowed for differing opinions, as we saw last time. The southern preachers, when I say southern I mean from Virginia southward, these preachers met at Fluvanna in 1779, right here, and agreed to form a Presbyterian style of polity, elders laying hands upon each other and ordaining. The more Baltimore-based preachers to the north, of course, much of the Methodist work was curtailed north of Baltimore due to the American Revolution, but the quote northern preachers led by William Waters tried to find conciliation during this period. So you've got Methodists, indigenous, native-born Methodists, splitting on the issue on north and south about the need for sacraments, and this man here, William Waters, performed some unsung heroism in keeping Methodism together in the absence of Francis Asbury at the time. We have in our source documents William Waters' own accounts of holding together these two camps: those who wanted to administer sacraments, baptizing and celebrating communion, and were so doing in Virginia, and then the group led by him who tried to live by Wesley's standard plan, to live under Wesley's authority, to remain a lay movement under Wesley. William Waters wrote on his Baltimore 1780 conference, here's the Baltimore area there, the preachers met and he called together both the northern and the southern brethren. He says, April 24th, 1780, our conference began in Baltimore for those preachers who rejected the administering of the ordinances. Two of our brethren from the South, Philip Gatch and Robert Ellis, who had adopted the administering of the ordinances, attended to see if anything could be done to prevent a total disunion, for they did not wish that to be the case. They both thought the brethren of the South were hard with them, and there was little appearance of anything but an entire separation. They complained that I was the only one who did not join them, the only one to treat them with respect, with affection and tenderness. The brethren were as loving and full of zeal as ever, but I awfully feared our visit would be of little consequence. I went down and met with these southern brethren in the name of God, hoping against hope. We had a lot of loving conversation with many tears. We wept and prayed and sobbed, but neither would agree to the other's terms. After waiting 2 days and all hopes failing of any accommodation taking place, we had fixed on starting back the next morning, which would have meant the final, perhaps the final split. But late in the evening it was proposed by one of the Southerners in conference that there should be a suspension of the ordinances for the next year, 1780 to 1781, and that our circumstances should be laid before Mr. Wesley and his vice solicited in the business, and that Mr. Asbury should be requested to ride through the circuits and superintend the word at large. It was a conciliatory move to lay off and to see, as hostilities were nearing completion in the American Revolution, hostilities finishing roughly around 1781 with the Yorktown campaign, it looked like perhaps Wesley could find a way to provide sacraments. And so we have William Waters' work here, who indicates that both sides, because of his work in not judging but trying to bring them together and keeping communication open, narrowly avert a northern and southern split even before we are a duly constituted church. Of course, the northern and southern regions of Methodism would split in 1845, but that's for another a story for another day. So the movement emerges. The Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783. Wesley is consulted, and Methodism has an opportunity to decide how shall it nurture the movement. Now that most of the priests of the Church of England have returned home, sacraments are unavailable to most of the Methodists who are growing, and so the question is put before Wesley and this man, Thomas Coke. How shall sacraments be provided? With the Treaty of Paris in 1783, we have an independent American nation that is formed. You can see this here. This is the territory created and gained by the U.S. by treaty in 1783, and so overnight you have new frontier possibilities for ministry, and the possibility of working with the largely discredited Anglican Church, and the priests there that did remain on the ground, mostly in Virginia and southwards, were not too well disposed to providing sacraments for the Methodists. And so Wesley is faced with the question how to continue to provide authority for a rapidly indigenizing church that may split if sacraments are not given. The argument from people like William Waters to try to stay within connection with Wesley's authority, along with Asbury, obviously is just a tenuous solution. In the conference minutes from 1779 through the divided conferences up until the founding of the independent Methodist Episcopal Church in America at the Christmas Conference of 1784 shows this tension, and Wesley has to determine how to provide nurture for a movement with great prospects for growth. How do you keep that authority together? So Wesley had really dragged his feet a long time on the question, and his first line of argument was to try to secure ordination for Methodist preachers in America through the Bishop of London and the the Anglican bishops. He sought the Bishop of London, and the Bishop of London was originally open to the prospect, but indicated that with Anglican ordination one needed Hebrew and Greek as prerequisites, and Wesley knew that his preachers in America were not likely to pick up the biblical languages. He did give a parting shot to the Bishop of London by saying, your preachers know nothing of saving souls as of catching whales. Perhaps my preachers may not know much about biblical Hebrew and Greek, but they know something of saving souls. So this was a shut door. The bishops of London would not ordain them, and Wesley realized that the English bishops would ordain his preachers in America. Quote, they would likewise expect to govern them, which was unacceptable for him. So that line was gone. And this really didn't bother Wesley too much, because he understood that the ordination built on apostolic succession was really not a prospect, was really an illusion in the case even of the Church of England. So Wesley began to read particularly Lord Peter King's account of the early church, and he discerned through this writings that in the early church ministry orders developed to support and expand the mission of the church. They were late developments. In fact, the episkopos, or the bishop, was in the early church simply an overseer of other set apart ministry elders for the sake of the missionary support of a region, the core episkopos concept. So that the ministry orders were dependent upon mission. Wesley said, I am in a missionary situation. In fact, there are no English bishops or any bishops at all whatsoever on the ground to oversee America. Therefore, I am an overseer. I am a core episkopos. Also, Lord Peter King's account convinced him that the bishop, or the core episkopos, was not a third order of ministry. That deacon, elders were the orders of ministry in the early church, and the episkopos was simply an elder set aside for the missionary task of overseeing. Of course, they gained power, but Wesley likewise argues correspondingly, I am an elder set aside, and I have missionary responsibilities as a core episkopos. It is an office, not an order. Therefore, as an elder, I have the right to call together with other elders and ordain to send for missionary purposes in a situation where I invade no episcopal right. Thus, he calls together his other ordained Lieutenant Thomas Coke, who was responsible for drawing up his deed of declaration and the model deeds. And Thomas Coke, who is already an elder, is set apart by Wesley for the office. It's consecrated for the office of overseer, and that's why he chooses the word superintendent to solidify that Thomas Coke and also Francis Asbury will be set aside as superintendents, core episkopos, for the missionary work in America. Thomas Coke, who has a little bit of ecclesial ambition, takes this as a sign that he is being consecrated bishop, and begins to use the term bishop on the way over to America. John Wesley consecrates Coke to ordain and consecrate Asbury. Asbury is not ordained at the time. And also, John Wesley calls together, based on that logic that we just indicated, Lord Peter King's arguments, the missionary work of the early church creates the bishops to sustain the work of mission and creates the ministry orders. John Wesley ordains Watcote and Vasey, with Thomas Coke laying hands upon them, sending them out as the first two ordained elders sent by Wesley for America in 1784. This is Richard Watcote, who becomes the third bishop of America in 1800, and Thomas Vasey, who both of these men had been trusted lieutenants preaching in Britain. And so that's the argument. And on the way over, Thomas Coke takes on the role of bishop and begins to call himself a bishop. So with that consecration, Wesley sends a letter, a very historic letter, appended to the Sunday service, the liturgical work that he abridges from the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. He sends this to America and issues the pastoral letter upon which the logic of our ministry ordination theology is built. To Dr. Coke, Mr. Asbury and our brethren in North America, September 10th, 1784, by a very uncommon train of providences, many of the provinces of North America are disjoined from their mother country and erected into independent states. He goes on to say that now England cannot interfere with America. He makes an argument. Likewise, the Methodists in America must stand in their own right. He goes on to say the argument of Lord King's account of the primitive church convinced him that he had the same right to ordain as any presbyter of the early church, because he was a missionary and did not invade any other legal jurisdiction of a bishop. So he says, I have accordingly appointed Dr. Coke and Mr. Francis Asbury to be joint superintendents over our brethren in North America, and Richard Watcote and Thomas Vasey to act as elders, baptizing and administering the Lord's Supper. And I've prepared a liturgy, the Sunday service, differing but a little from that of the Church of England, which I think the best constituted national church in the world. He goes on to say, it has indeed been proposed to desire the English bishops to ordain our preachers, but this was not possible. as our American brethren are now totally disentangled both from the state and from the English hierarchy, we dare not entangle them again, either with the one or with the other. They are now at full liberty simply to follow the scriptures in the primitive church, and we judge it best that they should stand fast in that liberty wherewith God has so strangely made them free. Upon this letter rests not only the logic and theology of your ordination, but this is the Declaration of Independence as it was interpreted by